Good evening and welcome to the Ordinary Council meeting, Monday the 27th of June 2022. 1. Meeting opening. 1.1 attendance. Mr Benny, are there any apologies?
Yes, Mayor and Councillors. The leave of absence continues tonight for Councillor Formoso, and we have a single apology from Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mr Benny. Item 1.2, acknowledgement of traditional owners of the land. Council acknowledges the traditional owners and custodians of this land, the Bunurong people, and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, while also recognising their deep continuing connections to climate, culture and country. We also pay our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their elders and acknowledge their journey. Item 1.3, offering of prayer, reflection or affirmation. As part of Council's commitment to recognising the cultural and spiritual diversity of our community, the prayer, reflection or affirmation this evening will be offered by Ms Shanti Shandarukumar from the Hindu community, a member of the Greater Dandenong Interfaith Network, which will be read out this evening by Councillor Milkovich.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. God is love and God is one. O Lord Sachitanantna, on this day we request your adorable mercy and love. We give thanks to you for having granted this day of blessings and joy, a meaningful happiness we shared with all your creation. We also thank you for your love bestowed on us and never-ending grace we enjoy daily in your name. We humbly prostrate before you, O Lord, the omnipresent, omnipotent and omniscient. We also thank you for your existence with us, guiding through our lives as consciousness and bliss absolute. Grant to us, understand others' hearts emanating equal vision, balanced mind, faith, devotion and wisdom. Keep us away from worldly temptation, materialism of today, and help us to build our inner spiritual strength. O Lord, teach us to be mindful, remove egoism, lust, greed, hatred, anger and jealousy. We behold unto you to teach us to share your lovely, immaculate and care for others in your great names as Sivan, your eldest son Ganapati, and the youngest son Murugan. Give us this day to remember your name in our lips and to abide in thee forever. May your glory fill every heart and all the creations. Let us remember your love every time we bat our eyes and forever. May our wisdom echo in the universe as Anbe Sivam and God is one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Milkovich. Item 1.4, confirmation of minutes of previous meeting of Council held on the 14th of June 2022.
Happy to move it.
Moved by Councillor Tan, seconded by Councillor Milkovich. Are there any questions? Is there any opposition? If there is no opposition, I declare the motion carried. Item 1.5, disclosures of interest. Mr Benny.
Mayor and Councillors, there is a single disclosure this evening. It's from Councillor Sophie Tan. It relates to item 4.4.3, Community Support Grants Round 1 2022. The type of interest is an indirect material conflict of interest of a pecuniary nature. The nature of the interest is that Councillor Tan is an Executive Director for the Cambodian Association of Victoria. Councillor Tan will be required to repeat the declaration and leave the chamber prior to the item. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Benny. Item 2, Officers' Reports, Part 1, 2.1, Documents for Tabling, 2.1.1, Petitions and Joint Letters. Moved by Councillor Long, seconded by Councillor Trung. Are there any questions? Is there any opposition? If there is no opposition, I declare the motion carried. 2.2, Statutory Planning Applications. 2.2.1, Planning Decisions issued by Planning Minister's Delegate, May 2022. Moved by Councillor Tan, second by Councillor Lim. Are there any questions? Is there any opposition? There is no opposition. I declare the motion carried. 2.2.2 Planning Delegated Decisions issued May 2022. Moved by Councillor Milkovich, second by Councillor Lim. Are there any questions? Is there any opposition? If there is no opposition, I declare the motion carried. Item 3, question time public. Mr Benny.
The first question this evening is from Dom Bakari of Keysborough. Hello, Dandenong Council. For some time now we have had concerns about some narrow streets in Keysborough South causing dangerous situations for our emergency services and garbage collection days. When will Council set up and adopt their own parking on narrow streets policy? On the CGD document it reads, Council has adopted a more flexible approach to allow parking on nature strips in narrower residential streets. Council's document also reads, Council will construct a concrete strip behind the curb on these streets. The policy covers streets within the city of Greater Dandenong that are narrower than 6.6 metres, such as Jakes Road, Caffardy Boulevard, Grevilla Avenue, Tamarind Avenue, and many more within the entire city of Greater Dandenong, especially Keysborough South. When I was discussing this matter with some residents in these narrow streets, I was shocked to hear that one had been fined for parking 2 wheels up on the curb. How many others are there? Mr Bosman could respond, Mr Mayor.
Mr Bosman? I think it's Mr Cinquegrano. Sorry, Mr Benny.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr Mayor. The reference document is the Parking in Narrow Streets information sheet, and that is an adopted document and it's available on the city's website. Residents can apply street by street to have a narrow street assessed by one of our traffic engineers as part of that document, and that assessment will be used to determine what physical works would be required to allow for nature strip parking as described. The information sheet is clear about enforcement and why motorists would be fined for parking on the nature strip.
Thank you, Mr Cinquegrano. Mr Benny.
The next question is from Ros Blades of Noble Park. I'm getting a lot of inquiries about Wachta Reserve wetland development, so I went down and took a look. It looks okay, but can we please explain to residents why it doesn't look finished? Also, there is temporary fencing which is crooked in a couple of places. Additionally, I seem to remember that around $50,000 was in a council budget for trees on Wachta Reserve. Can you maybe do a press release or Facebook post letting people know what has happened with that? Mr Cinquegrano.
Mr Cinquegrano.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Council does have an item on this project on its website, but I will arrange for it to be updated, particularly now that we've recommenced work on site, and that's the boardwalk that I'm referring to. Once the boardwalk construction is complete, we'll be able to remove all of that temporary fencing.
Thank you, Mr Cinquegrano. Mr Benny.
Next question is from Matthew Kerwin of Noble Park. What is the reason that the Billabong area in Fotheringham Reserve, Dandenong, is now fenced off? Is it that the Billabong restoration works is starting, and if so, what is the time frame for completion? Mr Cinquegrano.
Mr Cinquegrano.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The actual Billabong work, or the Billabong restoration works, have been completed, but we're now undertaking the boardwalk replacement, and that's why there's temporary fencing to protect that part of the site. Planting is also going to be done around the outside of the Billabong, and that's due to be undertaken in spring.
Thank you, Mr Cinquegrano. Mr Benny.
And the final question this evening is from Matthew Kerwin of Noble Park. What is the reason... Hang on, it's the same question. My apologies, I had 2 question 3s and no question 4. Question 4, Matthew Kerwin of Noble Park. What is causing the delay of the construction of the new gallery in Mason Street, Dandenong, and what month and year is practical completion now expected to occur? Mr Cinquegrano.
Mr Cinquegrano.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Works on the gallery have been delayed by a contract dispute, but we're expected to recommence works on the site within the fortnight. It's not possible to determine a practical completion date until we actually have these works underway.
Thank you, Mr Chinquegrano. Mr Benny?
That concludes the questions, but there was one public question taken on notice at the last meeting. That was from Gay Guest of Keysborough. That question has been answered and that will be included in tonight's minutes.
Thank you, Mr Benny. Item 4, Officers' Reports, Part 2, 4.1, Contracts, 4.1.1, Contract number 2122.33, Turf Renovation Services and Supply of Turf Products.
Happy to move, Mayor.
Moved by Councillor Dark, second by Councillor Long. Are there any questions? Is there any opposition? If there is no opposition, I declare the motion carried. Item 4.2, Finance and Budget. 4.2.1, Adoption of the 2022-23 Budget.
Move, Mayor.
Moved by Councillor Dark, second by Councillor Long. Are there any questions? Is there any opposition? If there is no opposition, I declare the motion carried. Councillors, just like to comment on the budget. This budget ensures that we as Council can deliver our valuable services to the community while also managing a capital spending program that improves our infrastructure and stimulates our local economy. We will be investing $55.6 million in the 22-23 to deliver key infrastructure projects that include $12.5 million to improve our roads, $10.7 million for the new Keysborough South Community Hub, $4.3 million to widen Perry Road in Keysborough, $4.1 million to renew our drains, $2.5 million to reconstruct the athletics track at Ross Reserve in Noble Park, $2.5 million to continue the widening of Abbots Road in Dandenong South, and $1.8 million towards the construction of the Dandenong Wellbeing Centre, formerly Dandenong Oasis Pool. In support of climate change and sustainability, we'll invest $862,000 in tree planting, and we'll also focus on the design of the new Dandenong Community Hub, the kindergarten room fit-out and maternal child health community facilities at Rosewood Downs Primary School, and design for the Barry Powell Reserve and new tennis table centre. Despite the additional financial challenges of the pandemic, our Council is proud to deliver a budget that will deliver positive outcomes for all our community. Councillor Dark.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, you beat me to the punch as I was about to quickly jump up. I just want to echo the sentiment of your comments as well. This has been, or what is actually my 6th budget now, being on Council, and this was probably the toughest budget that we've been through. There's no question that COVID has substantially impacted Council's operations and our bottom line, and it has caused a lot of ripple-on effects that this Council is still currently dealing with at the moment, and we do see the same thing with the current COVID rates we see climbing again. I am particularly proud to mention a couple of things, but the $750,000 for the Stage 2 of the Frederick Wachter Reserve Master Plan, which will start with the second round of the playground, to create what will be a regionally significant playground for my residents. The renewal of infrastructure, given that my ward is one of the older wards within our municipality, and having the footpath renewal, the road renewal of assets and infrastructure is something that is critical and something that certainly I'm proud of representing on this Council, to ensure that my residents and generally the residents all of the city of Greater Dandenong have the best facilities there. I just wish to thank the officers, particularly the Finance Directorate, for the work that they've done, led by Michelle Hanson, in being able to put together a budget and send that through to the councillors. So I wish to thank them for the work that they've put in, and hopefully we get to the mid-year budget and we are strengthening our financial position. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dark. Councillors, we'll move on to the next item, 4.2.2, Adoption of the 2022-23 to the 2031-32 Long-Term Financial Plan. Moved by Councillor Dark, second by Councillor Tan. Are there any questions?
Question.
Councillor O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mayor. I've gone over the long-term financial plan, and many of the question will be to the Executive Manager, Finance and Information Technology. Many of the projections in our plan, round about 2% increases annually, given the previous and forecasted future rises in interest rates. When will this long-term financial strategy be next revised? And also, if I could get advice on what will be the major impacts to the long-term financial strategy and future council budgets from increased interest rates and escalating council input costs.
Ms Hanson.
Through you, Mayor, thanks for the question. Just by way of background, the long-term financial plan begins its development with the budget back in November, so November 21 through to about April. So this document's due, it's quite a dynamic document, so it's updated annually by Council and presented around this time of the year for adoption. Interest rates and the current economic conditions and inflationary pressures that we're all facing at the moment will have a direct impact into Council's long-term financial plan, which will be reviewed in the coming months as we know more about some of those movements, impacts on our capital works program and operational budgets. Probably the key thing for our major, or in the long-term financial plan, or the major impacts will be around borrowings, as this council draws down on some significant borrowings in the coming years. They're still a few years away, with $6 million to be drawn down in the next 12 months, but we are accessing Treasury Corp Victoria or through the Community Infrastructure Loan Scheme, which will give us some subsidy on that. But most of those impacts will be reviewed in the coming months and as we go through mid-year budget review and how that feeds back into the long-term financial plan.
Thank you, Ms Hanson. Thank you, Councillor O'Reilly. Are there any further questions, councillors? Is there any opposition? If there is no opposition, I declare the motion carried.
May I speak to this one?
Councillor Dark.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, just wish to once again congratulate and thank the Director of Finance, Michelle Hanson, for putting together this long-term financial strategy. We are one of the councils, as it reports, that has one of the highest debt levels in the Eastern Region Council block. But we are actually also one of the municipalities that actually delivers infrastructure for our community, and without having to look at borrowing capacity and looking at what options we do have, we would not be able to deliver the infrastructure that we have, such as the Springvale Library, this building right here that we stand in. You look at the neighbouring councils, the City of Knox is a good case in point, extremely low debt, if at all any, and very little infrastructure. The City of Bayside, very, very similar again, very, very debt adverse and very little infrastructure for the community. It's interesting to see, as you touched on yourself, when the City of Manningham came to have a look at the Springvale Library and to see what we are building, other councils are taking notice. And we have been very fortunate, as Director Hanson stated before, about the $6.12 million that we have been able to receive through the Treasury Corporation of Victoria, which is at a very, very low interest rate, which is good for councils when it comes to being able to financially fund infrastructure of the future, including the Keysborough South Community Hub and the starting work of the Dandenong Aquatic and Wellbeing Centre as well. So I just wish once again to congratulate the Director of Finance and the Finance Director for putting this together.
Thank you, Councillor Dark. Item 4.3, Policy and Strategy. 4.3.1, Review of Fixed Asset Accounting Policy 2022 to 2023. Moved by Councillor Dark, second by Councillor Lim. Are there any questions? Is there any opposition? If there is no opposition, I declare the motion carried. Item 4.3.2, Planning Scheme Amendment C228G Dan Public Open Space Contribution Plan, consideration to adopt and request approval. Moved by Councillor Dark.
Second.
Second by Councillor Milkovich. Are there any questions? Is there any opposition? There is no opposition. I declare the motion carried. Councillor Dark.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, with regards to this item, I just wish to make a couple of comments. The City of Great Dandenong, and through the public open space contributions, is a mechanism that this council uses to fund infrastructure and fund the areas that we have. We have one within the industrial space, which is used to fund the road infrastructure improvements, such as the Abbots Road duplication we've done. We are getting to a point where tenders are becoming very sharp, prices of materials are skyrocketing, and it's affecting a lot of councils within Victoria, particularly in the southeast as well. By increasing the levy, it means we then have more funds to ensure we can appropriately cover all of the future infrastructure contributions that we have. Now, in a residential capacity, it goes from existing 5 to proposed 6.3. A commercial goes from 0 to proposed 2%, and then the others have no change that's listed in there. Going out for consultation, it was since there was no submissions that came back, so hopefully we'll have an executed document from the Department of Planning sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dark. Item 4.3.3, Community Engagement Planning Framework. Moved by Councillor Tan, second by Councillor Long. Are there any questions? Is there any opposition? If there is no opposition, I declare the motion carried. (4.3.4) Greater Dandenong Library Strategy 2022 to 2026 endorsement. Moved by Councillor O'Reilly, second by Councillor Lim. Are there any questions? Is there any opposition? If there is no opposition, I declare the motion carried. 4.3.5 Discover, Create, Share Arts, Culture and Heritage Strategy 2022 to 2026. Endorsed. Moved by Councillor Dark, second by Councillor Milkovich. Are there any questions? Is there any opposition? If there is no opposition, I declare the motion carried. (4.3.6) Domestic Animal Management Plan. Moved by Councillor O'Reilly. Do we have a seconder, councillors? Second by Councillor Trong. Are there any questions? Councillor O'Reilly. Go, Councillor O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mayor. Just on the topic of cat curfews, I read in the document that they might be introduced in the next year or so. Possibly, is that true, Director?
Mr. Bosman.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Through yourself, Councillor, the cat management strategy, which is a component of the report that comes before you tonight, recommends that we go about introducing a cat curfew as one of the components of the cat management strategy. In order to give effect to that idea, in order to give effect to a cat curfew, we would have to amend our local law. We are due to do a review of our local law later in the year, commencing later in the year. And before that, obviously, the communication with the community, etc., will commence. As part of the review of the local law, there's an engagement with the community. There's exhibition and consultation that's required as part of that process. And then all being well, should there be a resolution to adopt the cat management strategy and we go down that path and we review the local law, we should be in a position to then implement a reviewed local law, to promulgate that, to gazette that, probably around about the beginning of May next year, having gone through the local law review process. And at that time then, the cat curfew will be become effective as part of the management strategy, the cat management strategy. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Bosman. Councillor O'Reilly. Thank you. Councillor Garrard.
Thank you, Mayor. Just further clarification on the consultation process. Is there a separate consultation process to the exhibition, or is the exhibition the only consultation process in relation to the cat curfew?
Mr Bosman.
Mr Mayor, thank you to yourself, to Councillor Garrett. If Council resolves to adopt the recommendation tonight, the recommendation of officers, there are a number of things that will flow on from that, Councillor Garrett. One, of course, is the actions that are within the revised domestic animal management plan, and others would be actions that were within the cat management strategy. Within both of them are requirements or actions with regard to education, community consultation, and even though we might not yet have reviewed the local law, or that will only happen, will commence at around about August, that the responsible cat, and there are references through the document, I can pick the page numbers if you want, but there are references about responsible dog ownership, responsible cat ownership, about increasing the registration of cats as part of the cat management strategy. And in fact, cat curfews are only shown to be effective where there has been an effective increase in cat registrations in the first place. It's all part of that strategy. So we will engage with the community immediately following this evening's resolution, should that resolution be to adopt the cat management strategy. And then as part of that cat management strategy and the education, when we get to review the local law, we will also then, as part of the local law review, engage with the community again. And once, if the local law is successfully reviewed and it becomes embedded within the local law, it becomes effective. The cat curfew then becomes effective upon promulgation of the revised local law. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Bosman. Councillor Garrard.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr Bosman. So my understanding then is that it will be recommended as part of the change to the local law, and the exhibition will be the moment that people get to consult on it. So that's fine. That's answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garrard. Is there any further questions, councillors? Is there any opposition? If there is no opposition, I declare the motion carried. .3.7 Council Plan 2021 to 2025, Revised 2022 and Annual Plan 2022-23. Moved by Councillor Long, second by Councillor Lim. Are there any questions? Is there any opposition? There is no opposition. I declare the motion carried. 4.4 Other, 4.4.1 Draft Minutes of the Community Safety Advisory Committee meeting on the 11th of May 2022. Moved by Councillor Long. Second by Councillor Trong. Are there any questions? Councillor Dark.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question to the relevant officer regarding the Dandenong Zero project and the discussions about, particularly, I suppose, homelessness and the offences that are occurring. From the officers, or from the conversations I had, what action are we currently taking?
Mr Devine.
Through you, Mr Mayor. The trial of functional zero commences officially in 2 weeks' time. There's been a number of pre-meetings with Launch Housing and other VicPol and other key agencies. The actual official launch will occur on the 5th of August, and there'll be an update provided to councillors at a CBS, I think it's the 4th of August, Mr Mayor. So there's been no on-the-ground action at this point in time, but things are about to start moving.
Thank you, Mr Devine. Councillor Dark.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, I noticed as well in item number C that we're launching, I've seen Coffee with a Cop advertised on the iWatch page, but now we're launching Coffee with a Cop and a Councillor. I just want to find out exactly, of the 5 that are planned, how that's, I suppose, being scheduled and how that's planning on working.
Mr Devine.
Through you, Mr Mayor, they're planned for late in July, so there is a bit of time now. There'll be an info sum coming out to councillors in the coming week, and those dates and times will be put in the councillors' diaries very shortly.
Thank you, Mr Devine. Any further questions? Is there any opposition? If there is no opposition, I declare the motion carried. Item 4.4.2, draft minutes of the Cultural Heritage Advisory Committee meeting on the 12th of May 2022. Moved by Councillor Long.
Second.
Second by Councillor Dark. Are there any questions? Is there any opposition? If there is no opposition, I declare the motion carried. Four point 4.3 Community Support Grants, Round 1, 2022. Councillor Tan.
Thank you, Mayor. I can confirm that I have a conflict of interest in this item. So I declare, in accordance to Section 127 to 129 of the Local Government Act 2020, that the type of interest that has given rise to the conflict of interest is the indirect material conflicts of interest of a pecuniary nature. I can confirm that I am the executive member for the Cambodian Association of Victoria.
Thank you, Councillor Tan. Councillor Tan will now leave the meeting room. Councillors, 4.4.3 Community Support Grants, Round 1, 2022. Moved by Councillor Dark. Second by Councillor Long. Are there any questions? Is there any opposition? There is no opposition. I declare the motion carried. Please, Councillor Dark, sorry.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to quickly congratulate two groups that operate in the Keysborough Ward, South East United Football Club or Soccer Club, for the Iftar's dinner during Ramadan, which I attend along with yourself, Mayor, and Councillor Formosa, I know has attended in the past, and also to the Keysborough Bowls Club for the 2022 Barefoot Bowls program for children and women. And I do know that they're doing quite a bit of work in terms of getting people involved as a new community support, not only from the women next door on the retirement village at Parkland, but also local kids through local schools, so it's very exciting.
Thank you, Councillor Dark. Can we please have Councillor Tan back in the meeting? Councillors, will move on to the next item, 4.4.4, reports on matters discussed at councillor briefing sessions and pre-council meetings on the 9th, 16th, 23rd of May and the 6th of June 2022. Moved by Councillor Milkovich, second by Councillor Lim. Are there any questions? Is there any opposition? If there is no opposition, I declare the motion carried. Item 4.4.5, proposal to lease Council's leisure services premises to South East Leisure Proprietary Limited. Moved by Councillor Long. Second by Councillor O'Reilly. Are there any questions? Is there any opposition? If there is no opposition, I declare the motion carried. 4.4.6, list of registered correspondence to the Mayor and Councillors. Moved by Councillor Trung.
Second, thanks.
Second by Councillor Tan. Are there any questions? Councillor Dark. I'll go Councillor Dark first.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, just a question of two things. The first being the request from the support to the Mayor from Make a Difference, if I could get some details on what that is regarding.
Mr Devine.
Through you, Mr Mayor, Council's had a significant program in place since the start of COVID, providing support to our community groups and providing material aid to our community members that are in need. The Make a Difference Dingley Village has been provided with approximately $13,500 between state government and council funding to provide food for the community. That funding comes to an end on the 30th of June, and council officers have been working with groups such as Make a Difference Dingley Village and a number of other agencies in terms of what that food provision looks like going forward.
Thank you, Mr Devine. Councillor Dark.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a supplementary with that. Given Make a Difference is based in Dingley Village, which is in the city of Kingston, have we done, in order to confirm they are providing material support to residents of the city of Greater Dandenong rather than paying for residents of the city of Kingston? And two, have we had any conversations with the city of Kingston about the grants and funding streams that they provide to groups?
Mr Devine.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the Make a Difference were introduced to our councillors by the Mayor of the City of Kingston. We did validate that they are providing food to members of our community, and they were one of the community groups that weren't funded in the initial round of funding for material aid, but the money they have received has actually been state government money administered by City of Greater Dandenong.
Thank you, Mr Devine. Thank you, Councillor Dark. Councillor Garrard.
Thank you, Mayor. We received correspondence from Planet Arc Australian Circular Economy asking us to participate in a survey assessing how the principles of a circular economy are being implemented at the local government level. Are we taking part in this important data gathering endeavour?
Mr Bosman.
I do believe, Councillor Garrett, I do believe we are. I'll take the question on notice in terms of the details, and whatever details I can get to you, I will. But I do believe we are gathering that information.
Thank you, Mr Bosman. Thank you, Councillor Garrard. Are there any further questions? Is there any opposition? There is no opposition. I declare the motion carried. Item 4.4.7, adoption of the Greater Dandenong Asset Plan 2022-23 to 2031-32. Moved by Councillor Dark. Second by Councillor Tan. Are there any questions? Is there any opposition? There is no opposition. I declare the motion carried. Councillor Dark.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, for those that are watching at home and for those who, I suppose, watch this at a later stage, the asset plan is one of the most vital documents that this council can put together, particularly given that we do have some level of ageing infrastructure in place, and the assets that this council maintains on behalf and as custodians for our ratepayers is very, very important. The interesting part being from the recent revaluations is that the total asset valuation that has come in for our assets is $3,151,475,824, which comprises of 691 kilometres of roads, 188 kilometres of bike and shared footpaths, and 1,100 kilometres of footpaths. 233 buildings, including 2 aquatic centres, 31 kindergartens and 15 public centres and halls, 152 playgrounds, 35 sports reserves, 197 parks totalling 523 hectares and 33 bushland areas, and that is a very, very large amount of assets that we have, and this plan will ensure that for the future generations we have everything maintained in place.
Thank you, Councillor Dark. Item 5, notice of motion. There are none. Item 6, reports from councillors, delegated members and councillor questions. Councillor Trong.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last week, on the 9 of the councillors, and our councillors go to NGH, that National General Assembly, and we learn a lot from from them. We can learn. We can listen from some report and some conference at the conference room, and also we listen from climate change, environment, recycling, and also some service like a aged care, or some the council who face with some disaster and something like that. It's very we learn a lot from it. We can't make a report in the time because it's too long. And we also learn from the some service and some store, and also we can learn something from the council who run in Japan. And by the time we have a mayor, deputy mayor, and 6 councillor, and also me, that 9 councillor, and also directors, Paul Kisley, which work with us over there as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Trong. Councillor O'Reilly.
Thank you, Mayor. I also had a productive time at the Australian Local Government National General Assembly. There were many issues that were discussed on an overall national level, but certainly pertinent to the city of Greater Dandenong. Additionally, I met many councillors in neighbouring councils, and that assists with my constant vigilance in where this council can partner with other councils. We should always try to do that, to work across the council border to maximise efficiencies and lower costs for our ratepayers and residents. So it's good to step outside the city of Greater Dandenong to see what other councils are doing, what the best practices are that we can bring home and implement here. On a different matter, Mayor, I have a question to the Director of Planning, and it's around parking signage and time limit changes. So when council does this, all of a sudden, well, to many people, changes parking time limit or rules around a location, does council start fining people from day one according to the new rules, or is there some grace period or leniency that applies?
Mr Bosman.
Mr Mayor, thank you through yourself. Councillor O'Reilly, generally there's a grace period whenever there are changes. Obviously, depending on what the nature of those changes are, the grace period varies. In some cases, it might need to be a bit longer if more of a community education exercise is required. In other cases, not so much of a grace period. So the answer is yes, there generally is. It depends on the circumstances, and if anybody feels that they need to have something in particular reviewed, whatever, I'm happy to have a look at it. But in most cases, we do have a grace period. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Bosman. Thank you, Councillor O'Reilly. Councillor Long.
These are some of the events that I've attended since my last formal meeting. On the 15th of June, I attended the 7 breakfast at the Atura. The 19th to the 22nd of June, I attended the NGA in Canberra, where there were a couple of motions put forward for the nation's first peoples to be recognised in the Australian Constitution. This is appalling that they have not already been recognised in this Constitution. On the 25th of June, I attended the soccer match between Dandenong City and Dandenong Thunder. Thunder won 3-1. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Long. Councillor Lim.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Just on the 27th of June, I had a chance to go to Springvale Boulevard with Mayor Jim Mameti and also with the Minister, Local Government Minister and Infrastructure, Minister Sean Lin, and also with other local MP. It's a great pleasure to see our Springvale Boulevard almost completed, likely going to be the end of July. Actually, because due to the rain, otherwise our boulevard can finish by the end of this month. And the next one is he went to have a look at multicultural place and also outdoor dining. He was very surprised to see how lovely our activity, Springvale Activity Center is. And the most important, I tell him that he took a photo as well with all those outdoor dining. And I said to him that we really need his help, especially from local government, to make Springvale a better place, especially become a tourist attraction. He was very surprised. Well, likely he's going to try to support my idea. On the Sunday to the Wednesday, all our councillors went to Elga National General Assembly. It's a lot of lesson to learn from that assembly. I just want to make it short. First of all, we have to try to build a strong community. The strong community because so far we haven't cared much about our climate change. Hopefully we should, learn the lesson from whatever happened in the past, like flood, bushfire, and so on, and we have to have a very good economic modeling. The most important, we should have insurance prior to the climate change or prior to the disaster. I think that is a good idea. It's not mean that we're going to get some money from the local government. I don't think it's possible because the most important probably as local government, we should advocate very strongly to state government and local government to get more money. It doesn't matter which way, either tax, increase tax or whatever, at least we have some money to protect ourselves from climate disaster. And so on. I heard all these things that the local government got cut a lot of funds from the state government, for example, capping our council rate. And the most important, the library used to subsidize 50% to the council, but now it's only 15%. It's just unbearable. How are we going to run the council? Because we are running a business as well, and so on, so many other things as well. And one more interesting about that is about the Stan Grant. He talked about democracy, global democracy, look like under threatening. It sounds like right in a way. It's like now it become autocracy instead on the rise. That sound good as well. He example about Donald Trump, about all those dictatorship and so on. Yeah, very interesting. And also not just that, the most important, my concern is about national housing in crisis. Not just our city, not just our state, everywhere, even in the remote area as well. That from a lot of councillors that from other remote areas complain about homeless as well. How are we going to do with that? That's another lesson to learn as well. And make it short, probably, a lot of things to tell, but just make it short. And also on the 23rd, on the Thursday as well, we had another meeting of the CEO employment remuneration with Mayor Jim Amati and also Angela Long, Councillor Angela Long, and also Councillor Rhonda Garrett as well. And on the 5th of June, we also, not yet, on the 23rd, on the 3rd Saturday, and we went to Cambodian Association to celebrate of the grand opening of the Cambodian Association gate and fences. It's a very exciting and represent the multicultural aspect Cambodian culture to our city as well. I'm probably the first one that after the Cambodian Association president raised that issue, I'm willing to donate $10,000 straight away the last probably 2 years ago. And look, very great one that Jim Amati, Mayor Jim Amati, Councillor Sophie Tan attend as well, and plus a lot of local MP as well. And that's about all. I think the last 2 times we meet the CEO employment remuneration. My first question is want to find out about last meeting. I just concerned about the car that hit the outdoor dining. Can we do something different? Because my concern, the next concern, if we keep like that, likely the car going to reverse can hit someone that sit at the outdoor dining as well. That's probably more trouble for our council. Secondly, if we can put the stainless steel bollard, probably more secure. And another third point is when the car reverse all the time, they love to reverse. When reverse, the people that sit at the dining table going to inhale a lot of carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide as well. That is not a good idea. If we can change, probably after the multi-level car park finish, we should change the car park instead of 30-degree angle, it may be put parallel to the curb instead. Would it be possible in the near future if we finish our multi-level car park? Just want to ask the relevant officer. Thank you.
Mr. Cinquegrano.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, certainly possible to have a look at that. The traffic engineers have been looking closely at that issue as it is, but having a review of that after we've completed the multi-deck car park would be a sensible time to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Cinquegrano. Councillor Lim.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Cinquegrano. Question number 2 is, what about I keep inform the resident and also the business owner in Springvale. I said our multi-level car park will finish very soon regarding to the renovation of the corner of each level. Would you mind to give me some idea how long it's going to take to finish that renovation? Because everyone keep asking me. I said very soon, but I don't know how soon. Like I said last meeting, sometimes they spend time one day and probably stop 1 or 2 weeks. Now, 3rd week already I haven't seen anything done yet so far. Thank you.
Mr. Cinquegrano.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, because it's such a complex project in such a, I suppose, a busy area, we've broken it up into 3 sections. That's why we've relocated all the services. We've then done the excavation, and we're now in the procurement process to appoint contractors to do the concrete work. Until we get them on board, we won't have an indication of when it will be complete. But it is happening, and it's in that final stage at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Cinquegrano. Councillor Lim.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Cinquegrano. And my 3rd question is, I had a discussion with Mr. Kevin Van Boxtel about 2 weeks ago regarding to the multi-level car park number 5. He said likely our council going to put the shutter, stop people from access to number 5 or number 6 by put a roller shutter. And we're very excited to hear that. The reason, because it can give all business owners the chance to park upstairs. They love to park with a very secure. If they have a swipe card before they can enter number 5, it's a very good idea. Second point is stop all these children to go up there to do all the silly things. Especially my concern about they jump from the upper level. You have any idea when we're going to start to build that? Thanks, Mr. Cinquegrano.
Mr. Cinquegrano.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There's a couple of phases to that. We're in the middle of doing some of the fencing works around the top, and we're doing some structural work to do that roller door. So I can't give you a completion date, but it is happening right now.
Thank you, Mr. Cinquegrano.
Councillor. Thank you, Mayor. My final question is, multi-level car park very dark. People always complain to me very frequently every time I encourage them to park at multi-level car park, and also on the street as well, like I mentioned at the last meeting, because even business owners were very worried about when they walk from their business to the station. And can we do something by even concerned about the cost? At the conference, I discovered that smart solar public lighting means something in our council, only in our city of Dandenong. They can use the solar panel to lighting our street and cost a lot less and also last about 10 years. I said that's a good idea. If we can look into it, very good, because it so look nice. The battery is not so expensive either. Thank you for that.
Mr. Cinquegrano.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, we're aware of the option of using the solar panels for street lighting, and often where they come into their own is in a remote location where it's very expensive to get the power supply to it. So that's where, like in our parks or other locations like that. So we are aware of them, but they're probably not suited to a location such as Springvale where we've got ready access to power.
Thank you, Mr. Cinquegrano.
Thank you, Mayor. That's all for me.
Thank you, Councillor Tan.
Thank you, Mayor. Over the weekend, so on the 25th of June, I attended the grand opening of the CAW Cultural Gates and Fans with yourself, Mayor, and Councillor Richard Lim. I just want to say congratulations to Cambodian Association of Victoria for their tremendous work. As a long-standing and well-respected organisation, it does an excellent job of strengthening cultural awareness and promoting a strong message of understanding and harmony within many of our diverse communities. So the actual fan is actually built and designed by one of the Cambodian architecture in Sydney, so which very well presenting the Cambodian culture. My question for tonight, just following up through you, Mayor, through the relevant officer, just regarding to Patong Court, has been completed last week. Just regarding to the surface, that was a bit soft, so I just want to find out from the officer, have you got an update from the contractor regarding to the surface? Yeah, thanks.
Mr. Cinquegrano.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, the standard, the Patong Court has been built to the standards that we apply to all our other Patong courts. We understand that it is a bit softer than expected, so we're looking closely at that. But it may be just a matter of time for that to settle and through use. But we don't have an assessment just yet. The contractor's still looking at what's happened there.
Thank you, Mr. Cinquegrano. Councillor Tan.
Yeah, that's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Garrard.
Sorry, Mayor, you caught me off guard there. Mayor, I too had the privilege of attending the National Assembly like many councillors, and just two important things that happened there. One was that the City of Greater Dandenong joined with ALGA and many other councils in calling for the federal government to provide a $200 million dedicated one-off fund to help vulnerable communities such as ours in the adaptation, mitigation and response to climate change. That motion was carried successfully, and hopefully further advocacy will mean that will come to fruition. The second thing that happened, Mayor, with yourself and many other councillors, was a successful meeting advocating for other councils to come and support the Dandenong Mayoral Task Force on to support refugees and asylum seekers. There was very strong support and interest in joining the Mayoral Task Force, so that was an extremely successful event at the Assembly. Mayor, my first question tonight is regarding an emerging problem. There is emerging evidence that a particular group of rat poisons, known as second-generation anticoagulant rodenticides, or SEGAs, are associated with a sharp increase in the death of a range of bird life and domestic pets. BirdLife Australia are calling on all councils to use readily available alternative methods for rodent management. Can the council confirm that it does use SEGAs, and if so, do we have a plan to phase them out?
Mr. Cinquegrano.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, our pest controller does use that product, and they have committed to phase it out. But I should also point out that the way it's used is put into a locked box that only the rodents can get into. So it is, it is designed so that birds and pets won't get to it, but we do recognise it's a problem, and that is going to be phased out.
Thank you, Mr. Cinquegrano. Councillor Garrard.
Just a follow-up comment, Mayor. Whilst I understand there is safe practice around that, the issue is that the rodents themselves do not die for quite some period of time, and the natural predators of the rodents are in fact eating the rodents and then ingesting the SEGAs, and this is causing the problem. We have a large number of cats and dogs that are dying this way, and it is a slow and cruel death and an unnecessary death, given that the first generation is an adequate way to address rodent management. So thank you, Mayor. My second question is around the Eastern Alliance for Greenhouse Action doing a power purchasing agreement with businesses in the eastern suburbs. Are we advocating for SECA to do the same?
Mr. Bosman.
Mr. Mayor, thank you through yourself, Councillor Garrard. Facilitation of a power purchase agreement is an identified priority in SECA for 22-23, depending on their budgeting and resource availability. This point has been added to the agenda for discussion at the next Councillor Advisory Group meeting on the 28th of July. That's the Councillor Advisory Group meeting that is part of SECA. In addition, SECA made a submission to DELP's proposed market facilitation platform project supporting this initiative and calling for greater state government support to enable wider business uptake of power purchasing agreements across Victoria, with a focus on the industrial sectors located in Greater Dandenong and in Kingston. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Bosman. Councillor Garrard.
Thank you, Mr Bosman. Mayor, my next question. When is the Greater Dandenong Biodiversity Action Plan coming to council meeting for adoption?
Mr Cinquegrano.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, the draft Biodiversity Action Plan has recently been completed with incorporating all of the feedback from the community consultation process. However, it's still some months before being in a state where it'll be ready to be presented to council. Thank you, Mr Cinquegrano. Councillor Garrard.
Just a follow-up question, Mayor. Could we have a broad timeframe, a matter of months? So are we talking, can we expect that, say, August of this year?
Mr Cinquegrano.
No, Mr Mayor, I'd be reluctant to commit to that, without us getting to the next stage for that. So I can't give you a time when it'll go to council.
Thank you, Mr Cinquegrano. Councillor Garrard.
Thank you, Mayor. How is Greater Dandenong involved in the Living Melbourne Metropolitan Urban Forest Strategy Program, and what projects is it planned to be involved in the coming year?
Mr Bosman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For yourself, Councillor Garrett, Greater Dandenong are partners in the delivery of Living Melbourne program. The main focus for our office currently is development of a communications toolkit, which is aimed at educating and engaging residents on the importance of our urban forests. So that's our involvement in it, and we are a partner in the program. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Bosman.
Thank you, Mr Bosman. My next question, what is the status and current timeframes of the Aboriginal Gathering Place feasibility study?
Mr Devine.
Through you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for the question, Councillor. A councillor briefing session to discuss the contents and tabling of the Greater Dandenong First Nations Community Space Feasibility Study is scheduled for the 18th of July, with a subsequent council report to be presented to the council meeting on the 22nd of August.
Thank you, Mr Devine. Councillor Garrett.
Thank you, Mr Devine. My final question, Mayor, is when is the consultation on the concept design for the Tatchwan Park Nature Sensory Trail going to start?
Grano.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The consultation for this project is yet to be programmed, but it's likely to be around September.
Thank you, Mr Cinquegrano. Councillor Garrard.
Thank you, Mayor. That's all my questions.
Councillor Milkovich.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of questions tonight. If we get an update from the relevant director regarding the actual seal of approval or finalising the documentation in regards to rezoning of Cardinia Close, please. I know the Minister has given his verbal approval or something to that effect, but when can we expect it to actually be done and sort of finalised? Thank you.
Mr Bosman.
Mr Mayor, thank you. Through yourself, Councillor Milkovich, we've sent it off to the Minister for the Minister's stamp of approval and gazettal. I can try and make some inquiries through the State Planning Office, through DELP, if there's an idea of when that will happen. I wouldn't know at this stage. There's no indication, but I can make those inquiries.
Thank you, Mr Bosman. Councillor Milkovich.
Thank you, Mr Bosman. Thank you, Mr Mayor. As long as it's moving along, I guess, then it's fine. And the residents a little bit, yes, thank you very much. No, that's fine. I'd also like to get an update from the relevant officer regarding a boardwalk in Tatchwan Park, which initially was fenced off due to one of the pillars or posts being rotten, but I understand the damage is far greater than what engineers originally anticipated or assessed. And could we get an idea as to when that's going to happen, and maybe if it's going to take a while, just to put up a sign advising residents as to why it's been closed off for so long, just so they got an idea as to, that something's been done. Thank you.
Mr Cinquegrano.
Yes, Mr Mayor. Look, because it will take some time, we will arrange a sign to be put up to inform the residents.
Thank you, Mr Cinquegrano. Councillor Milkovich.
Thank you, Mr Cinquegrano. Thank you, Mayor. During the last week's National Assembly, I saw quite an interesting program from Mobile Master, without advertising the business, in regards to their widening of operations in regards to recycling of laptops, chargers, bits and pieces, on top of mobile phones and whatnot. I was wondering if we could get maybe council officers or managers to get in touch with not just them, but any recycling company. Apparently, I was quite shocked and pleasantly surprised that 98% of the content on the mobile phone, but for the lettercase and whatnot, actually gets recycled, some domestically, some internationally, but nonetheless, it's a massive saving, and there's a lot of these devices going around. So if we could maybe get in touch with someone to see if we can widen our program in Dandenong, Springvale or somewhere else to include those bigger bins for laptops like Officeworks have got, and see if it's possible to sort of recycle more. Thank you.
Mr.
Michelle or Craig?
Mr. Cinquegrano, I think we'll just take it on notice.
Yes, look, I'm happy to pass it on to our waste education officers and see what they can do for us here.
Thank you, Mr. Cinquegrano. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just a final one. I've noticed lately, due to the obviously wet weather and a lot of work, or road work, or a lot of construction we're going on in Dandenong, quite a few of the builders and larger sites are making the roads absolutely terrible within the municipality. You know, with carting trucks taking soil out of the sites. Are we able to maybe just have a list of those bigger ones and have the officers visit them every now and again to remind them not to turn roads into mud pits, because it is quite dangerous. People slip and slide everywhere, particularly the resident. I actually saw one of the residents holding onto a temporary fence walking past the building site. It was that slippery with mud everywhere. So if we can maybe just ask them to do the right thing and help us all get along, while we obviously encourage and invite these projects to happen, to make sure that, you know, no one takes a fall in their 70s, 80s or even 20s. Yeah, for that matter.
Mr. Bosman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and to yourself, Councillor Milkovich. That has been a problem, and I know a couple of them you yourself have brought to our attention in the area. We do send out, and at pretty short notice, I might add, when it comes to our attention, or when our own officers see it when they're out and about doing their duties. We have our planning compliance team have a look at it from the point of view of whether or not there's non-compliance with the construction management plan. We have our local laws officers have a look at it as well from the local law point of view, and there's been a number of sites that we visited recently. I would encourage then residents, yourself, any other councillors, etc., to continue to bring these to our attention. Obviously, this is going to get worse or more prevalent during the wet season, but some of the bigger construction sites present the bigger problems. But you're right, the quicker we jump on them and monitor them, hopefully the quicker we get a change in behaviour. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Bosman. Councillor Milkovich.
Thank you, Mr. Bosman. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's all from me for tonight.
Thank you. Councillor Dark.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, along with the majority of my colleagues, I attended the ALGA conference in Canberra. It was actually a very well-attended conference, and not only that, but of the sponsor list, quite a few sponsors were key people and key groups from the city of Greater Dandenong. Ennis Flint, which is a very large road line marking and asphalt provider of supplies based in Hammond Road, had a very large stall there with several speakers, and they've been advocating to pick up a lot more local government work. And the platinum sponsor, the chief sponsor for the event, was SEA Electric from Advantage Drive in Dandenong South. And SEA Electric have been a very large employer and a very large company based in Dandenong South, who have been doing a lot of work with the conversion of a lot of future vehicles into the electric phase, including trucks and the fleets that councils would use. They had a very large plasma screen which showcased their trucks driving through the Lodges estate, driving down Hammond Road and cruising through Dandenong South, and what I'd probably say was one of the best weather days they've had. But it was very good to see that they did have a lot of support from other councils who were having conversations with them about where it comes. I did ask them to keep me updated with their progression as they start talking to a lot of other councils. I also had the opportunity last Friday to attend the MAV State Council. This is, for those who don't know, MAV is the Municipal Association of Victoria. It is the peak body representing local government, and each council sends a representative to the conference. There was a robust conversation with a lot of motions that had been discussed, particularly around planning matters, environmental matters, strategic matters regarding funding. A lot of the regional rural councils which were present had discussed the substantial budget implications that they have from having very small amount of residents, very large amount of area and roads. We were one of the councils which did have a late motion, which was one of the last, it was actually the very last item which was moved from the State Council. It was a late item agenda which was approved, and it was carried by 85% of the councillors in attendance to do with the issues in Afghanistan, to do with the asylum seekers and the circumstances around that. So to have an 85% coverage from 85% of councillors in Victoria is a very good achievement. I also had the opportunity of attending on the weekend, just gone, the Keysborough Soccer Derby between Keysborough Soccer Club and Endeavour Hills. It's one of the first times that the soccer ground the game has actually been held at Kimura Reserve, because historically they didn't have sufficient lighting to be able to accommodate late night soccer matches where people were able to go out, and once the sun sets in the middle of winter, we're finding it sets very early, they were unable to. So they actually had the lights on. There would have been in excess of 150 people there. I know the canteen did very, very good takings for the night. There was families coming to attend and previous players from the soccer teams over the years. I had the opportunity as well of having a meeting with the Keysborough Football Club and the upcoming planning of what they're doing with netball courts. And that does raise me to my first question of this evening. Can I please get an update on how the netball courts at Rowley Island Reserve are currently progressing and when we're expecting that they'll be completed?
Mr. Cinquegrano.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll have to have a close look at that, and I'll take that on notice and get back to you when we've got a completion date.
Thank you, Mr. Cinquegrano. Councillor Dark.
Thank you, Mayor. My second question is from a resident of mine, Carlton Williams, who lives at 310 Perry Road in Keysborough. It's a double-storey house on the corner of Perry Road and Cheltenham Road, next to the McDonald's there. Over the last few years, he's had, I believe it's 5 instances where vehicles have crashed into the fence as they're turning around the corner. There was one only a couple of months ago where the person turning the corner had lost control, veered head-on into the traffic on Cheltenham Road, over the embankment and into the letterbox. Mr. Williams had only 2 minutes beforehand collected his mail and then heard the bang, went out to his front yard and found his letterbox in pieces and a person trapped in a full drive in his front yard. He has, I believe, raised and asked a couple of questions with Vic Roads before they became the Department of Transport about the extension of a crash barrier that is there. There's basically a portion that runs along Cheltenham Road. There's a very large gap, and then there's a continuing one as you get to the corner of the intersection. He was wondering whether it was possible whether we could have a conversation, our engineers, also the Department of Transport, meet down there to see whether there's a way that we could potentially add an additional connection to connect the crash barrier up, such that in the event a vehicle comes across the road again, it'll hit the crash barrier and not go into his front yard again.
Mr. Cinquegrano.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy for our traffic engineers to talk to the Department of Transport about that issue.
Thank you, Mr. Cinquegrano. Councillor Dark.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, my next question is regarding the Keysborough Children's Centre on Cheltenham Road and the private childcare centre to the left of that. There's been some calls that I've actually received from a couple of residents of Keysborough who have been having issues in the morning between 8 to 9, where there's been a flurry of vehicles trying to turn in and out. There's people trying to attempt to do U-turns on 2 intersections, and then there's 2 cars pulling in and out of the childcare centre. There's been a couple of very close near misses where trucks have had to swerve. There's cars that can't get in and out in the traffic and cars turning off Chapel Road. I do have some photos that I will send out. It's becoming quite pressing because given the flux of vehicles travelling in the morning, and in the event that somebody pulls out, there could potentially be a very significant accident. I do know that the Keysborough Children's Centre does have a mesh gate that does access off the rear, and that runs off Brett Drive, whether there is potential that that could be open so that parents can get their kids into the childcare centre safely without the potential risk of being collided by a truck. I will send through the photos that I've got to the relevant officer to have a look at, but if we could have this looked at as a matter of urgency.
Mr. Bosman.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. I'm aware of the Brett Drive premises, Councillor Dark, so if you'll send that stuff through to me, I'll arrange for the necessary officers, either from my side or from Mr. Cinquegrano's side, to have a look at it. It's probably a collaboration between the two directorates, but if you'll send that through to me, I'll give it attention.
Thank you, Mr. Bosman. Councillor Dark.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, my last question for this evening, which potentially may have some supplementaries, is to do with the Shorelands Caravan Park on South Gippsland Highway. This is probably arguably the most grievous issue that we seem to be having with caravan parks in our municipality. It seems to be plagued consistently with issues, whether it be the amount of people that are currently living there, the arrangements which they're living there, and also the quality of standards that are there. I'm aware that there was a fire in which a person unfortunately lost their life a couple of weeks ago. A few years before that, there was somebody who did pass away, and I know that Council was aware of that as well, Mr. Medzit Jakupi. And there has been quite a consistent amount of issues with that. I know there's been issues with people who have been under the influence of substances that are walking out into the middle of South Gippsland Highway. It's getting to a point where, given now we've had the second fatality, certainly in my time on Council, that I think we need to really reassess what options are available. Can I have an officer just have a look and see what, I suppose, what the history is of the site, to what options are available for, I suppose, Council to get involved or to advocate to the responsible authorities. I did have a look on Intramaps. I did see, I believe that the site is owned potentially by the Department of Transport, or there is an overlay in place for a potential freeway to be built in the future. But just, I did go down there on the weekend, and just by walking through, and also by the history, I think this is an emergency we do need to deal with sooner rather than later.
Mr. Bosman.
Mr. Mayor, thank you through yourself. Councillor Dark, I know that we've recently exchanged emails, you and I, in terms of shorelands. Our council is very much involved in all sorts of things such as health and well-being support, social support. We were very involved from the early days on the onset of COVID in providing relief and support to the community there. The recent fire, our municipal building surveyor and building surveyors were involved in the inspection of the site. Our environmental health officers have been involved. So we've actually got quite an involvement in there. Obviously, we can't solve all of the problems there, but we do have, as I say, an involvement in certain aspects of the site. As far as the death that happened there recently as a fire, it hasn't been determined yet, as far as I can understand, what caused the fire, and if it's the other death that you're talking about, I believe was a homicide where there was a domestic violence issue. But we do have an involvement. We will then have a look at what other things, and as I mentioned to you, we will see if there's any further auditing. You've requested further auditing as well. We'll have a look if there's anything that we haven't done or could do more of, and get back to you, and if it's a case of engaging with some of the other agencies. And in fact, we already are involved with the fire department, we're involved with the Department of Health, etc., as a multi-agency support. But if there's anything more that we can advocate for with regard to shorelands, we certainly will do so. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Bosman. Councillor Dark.
Thank you, Mayor. And I actually stand corrected. There would be 3 fatalities we've had. I had forgotten about the domestic violence incident about 9 months ago at the site. The issue that I seem to be finding is, well, now we've got a third. We have a domestic violence issue, a fire, and a person who had passed away who was unable to be located. It is clearly, I suppose, in 3 deaths in a few years, and the other issues affecting the site, that it is becoming a substantial issue to the council. I do know that, and upon my searching, I did find the coronial finding from the coronial inquest that was actually issued to this council. This council was a recipient, and a copy was provided to the Director of Planning and Amenity. It does state on the last page that the City of Great Dandenong conducts annual inspections of all of its registered caravan parks to ensure compliance with available applicable regulations. Although the caravan park complied with its legal requirements by having some numbers that were placed that were hidden, and then subsequently there's some further information as well. So we are, I suppose, undertaking annual inspections, and unlike the Sundowner Caravan Park in the Springvale North Ward, which seems to be operating very, very well, this is becoming a substantial issue and almost an emergency when you have 3 people passing away in a few years. So if we could please investigate this as a matter of priority, whether we do it with the municipal building surveyor or from that planning approach as well, to see what options we can to improve safety so that nobody else dies.
Mr. Bosman.
Mr. Mayor, just to reiterate, we are involved, and as you point out, Councillor, we do carry out the annual inspections, and we've never failed to carry out an annual inspection. Having people die in caravan parks, I suppose it's like dying anywhere. It's a form of residential area. It is going to happen, but if we can help deal with the causes, if there are causes that are that we can help mitigate or ward off. As I mentioned to you earlier, we certainly will be doing that. And we'll get back to you on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Bosman. Councillor Dark.
Thank you, Mayor. No further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Dark. Like most of the councillors, I also attended the ALGO National General Assembly in Canberra, and some of the subjects that some of the councillors didn't touch on, we were welcomed by the Governor-General of Australia, David Hurley, who spoke to the Assembly, and also it was great to hear from him as well. And he did thank all the councillors throughout Australia that have been supporting the communities through COVID, so it was great to hear from the Governor-General. Also, we heard from the Ambassador of Ukraine, and there was a video of all the major cities in Ukraine and how they used to look before and what they look like now, and his plea was for government, I guess, and local government to support Ukraine in rebuilding schools and hospitals. So just a big plea from the Ambassador to the Assembly. And there was plenty of motions that were won and lost, and it was good to also network with all the councillors around Australia as well. Councillors, I attended the Springvale Boulevard on-site visit with Minister Sean Lin and local members, Mr Heng Ming Tak and Dr Tien Kyu and Lee Talamas. The Springvale Boulevard is coming along nicely, as Councillor Lim said, and hopefully that will be completed in the next month or two with weather permitted. And we did thank the Minister for, I think it was $900,000 grant towards the Springvale Boulevard. Later that morning, the Minister, Sean Lin, also attended the Noble Park Revitalization Board meeting, and as the Minister for Suburban Developments and the Chair, Lee Talamas, advised the committee that at least $1 million will go to the budget of the Noble Park Revitalization Board. So that'll continue again for another year, and it was good to be able to have that announcement where another $1 million from the suburban development will go to Noble Park. I also attended the Ubuntu Mamas group at the Afri Oscare community village in Springvale, where Selba, who does some great work with Afri Oscare, and I met many young people there, and it was good to catch up with the mamas as well. Always interesting when I'm attending, and also with Selba. Councillors, I attended the Wellsprings for Women launch, a anti-racism, COVID-19 and gender equality policies, which was launched at the Drum Theatre last week. I also attended the farewell function for Mr Raj Kumar, the Consul General for India in Melbourne. The Consul General is always around Greater Dandenong and has been participating in a lot of events with the Indian community, and I've got to know him over the last few years. So it was sad to see that he's going back home to India. I also attended the Magical Gateway Foundation afternoon tea to share videos and photos of the children on their first ever holiday from the Dandenong South Primary School. Magical Gateway Foundation, which is also supported by Council, and it was good to see that I think it was 20 children and 5 families, so 5 mums and dads, and 20 children went to a holiday in Phillip Island, and none of those children have ever been on a holiday, so it was great to see the video and what they shared together over 3 days, which was fantastic, and a good response. And I thank the school for helping out with those families and acknowledging which families have been missing out, so it was good to be there. Councillors, we just completed Refugee Week. Council had a celebration at the Dandenong Library. Great afternoon, many different culture groups, many colours, and we had a guest speaker. Her name was Zara Haidebig, who is a refugee to Australia. She's been here now for over a decade, and she spoke how her journey to Australia and how she's fitted in, and how she wants to give back to Australia, and especially Greater Dandenong, so it was great to hear her story. I also attended, like Councillor Lim and Councillor Tan, the grand opening of the traditional gate and fence at the Cambodian Association of Victoria. People who know Springvale know it well, and it's the Asian hub of the southeast, and many more projects like this are creating. It's going to be an attraction for people around Victoria to come and see our gateways and our fences and our boulevards and temples. So this is just another addition which we know is a lot in Springvale, and also encouraging people to visit Springvale. So congratulations to the Cambodian Association of Victoria. I also attended the Victorian Tamil Association Multhami Visa competition prize giving. The Tamil Association of Victoria have actually 8 schools which they operate throughout Victoria, and the competition was had about 1,200 children, so a huge amount of children, and it's a competition of poetry, singing, dancing, etc. And that was held in Dandenong as well, so it was good to visit the Victorian Tamil Association. I also was invited last night by His Excellency, the Ambassador of Turkey, Korhan Karakogic, who I had dinner with, and a delegation of ministers and members of Parliament from Turkey that were visiting Melbourne. So it was good to catch up and have a chat to them and talk about our community, where we have a very large Turkish community. That was most of the stuff that I did over since we had our last council meeting. Mr. Benny, to table some questions taken at the last council meeting.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, there were 17 councillor questions taken on notice at the last meeting. 14 of those have been addressed and are included in the minutes. There are 3 outstanding at this stage. They've taken a little longer to finalise than we expected. One of those is from Councillor Eden Foster, a letter of congratulations to Jessica Bagley. The other is from Councillor Bob Milkovich, the shed in the police paddocks, the removal of. And finally, Councillor Tim Dark, in relation to abandoned vehicles. Those outstanding questions will be finalised ASAP.
Thank you, Mr. Benny. Item 7, urgent business. If there is no urgent business, I declare the council meeting closed at 8:26 p.m. Thank you and have a great evening.